Hello my friends, it's the 17th of February 2016, Mr. Max Bliss in the southwest of France. This morning it was very frosty, beautiful clear sky, absolutely clear without a single cloud. All the planes that were flying just had very short dissipating contrails, if any at all. Yesterday was very blue, clear sky. It's very rare. Of course, it wasn't always that way, but unfortunately, mid-morning it started to change. Interestingly, still most of the planes flying had short dissipating trails at lunchtime. And there were just sporadic trails that were persistent, long, and spreading. And of course, now it's heading towards evening, the sun's going down, and there are many more persistent trails. The sky is looking sci-fi. It really is not natural. And yes, this has a massive impact on climate. This is part of a global weather and climate modification program. I'm really quite fed up with debunkers, and I'm disgusted with the corrupt establishment. The climate change agenda is really about conning the masses into acquiescence to global solutions for this hyped up fraudulent claim. It's interesting how it is understood how much electricity is in the atmosphere. It's a tremendous source of electricity. And in clouds, this is where the action is. In the troposphere, this is where the electricity happens. This is where it's generated. And these contrails do have electrical qualities to them that are being manipulated by the powers that shouldn't be, by the likes of Raytheon and Thales and all these different military industrial complex companies. And there are many of them all over the world. It's not just them. It's a short dissipating trail, look. Okay? It's still happening. But the sky is being obliterated for the purposes of weather modification. And it's interesting, isn't it, how contrails do not always look the same. Even in the same portions of the sky. And we can see the crystals spreading out here. The crystal growth. It's interesting, isn't it, that these contrails are often marginalised by the establishment. Lots of people concerned about them. They get called chemtrails, and rightly so, because these are artificially nucleated contrails. Some say by chemicals, so they're chemically nucleated contrails. Yet, if somebody complains to the Met Office or to their television provider that gives them the weather forecast, they are told, oh, these are just contrails, just a normal thing that happens because planes are flying in the atmosphere. And it is said because of the cold atmosphere up there and the right relative humidity conditions and saturation with respect to ice will determine whether or not you will see a contrail and whether or not it will persist. There are different discrete atmospheric conditions, apparently, for these contrails to persist, to spread out, to behave in the way that they do. And apparently it can be very, very different. But of course, not all planes fly at the same altitude, and apparently they can have different engines. But I believe that the whole process of combustion is still the fact that you're burning hydrocarbon fuels, releasing CO2, hydrogen, nitrous oxide, sulfuric acid, and various other bits and pieces into the atmosphere, into the exhaust plume. And it's interesting as well that over 200 years ago they understood about the processes of, well, at least theorised about the electricity in the atmosphere. Weather balloons were going up in 1806, measuring the different electrical and magnetic qualities of the atmosphere up to 23,000 feet in 1806. They've long been interested in understanding the electrical qualities of the atmosphere. There was a very famous physicist of his day, and still famous today, especially with the scientific minds, called J.J. Thomson. Now, J.J. Thomson is a man whose work is of great interest. He's the man that is attributed with naming the electron. He won a Nobel Prize for this. He was also very interested in the ether. There's a type of energy in the atmosphere called the ether. He was also interested in atmospheric electricity. And he monitored very closely a man that was working with him called C.T.R. Wilson, who was working on understanding the electrical global circuit. Now, J.J. Thomson was at a scientific symposium in Sheffield, England, in 1910. And whilst lecturing there, he stated that it would only take, according to his calculations, a modest amount of electricity would be required to modify the weather on a large scale. That's 1910. Now, they have been working to control the weather and climate for a very long time, and they are very advanced. And unfortunately for us, we the ordinary everyday people, we can no longer rely on the experts that are provided for us by the establishment. We can no longer trust the establishment. You should treat them with utter disdain. Everything that comes from the establishment you must consider is a lie until proven that it's the truth, which is a terrible realisation to have to live with, but that's the facts. Our governments lie. They fund institutions to lie about climate change. They misrepresent data. They alter data. It's a very good chance that many of the climate scientists involved with the climate change agenda may well be very good people working under an indoctrinated regime, using altered data, finding false results, but believing in their work because the information they're being fed is false. And then, of course, there are people who are very, very well aware that this is all a sham, and they are steering members of the climate change agenda, deliberately making sure the big con continues. They never talk about ionospheric heaters, about HAARP, doing weather modification. They never talk about the realities that weather modification actually does work. And they certainly never talk about the global electric circuit. They never talk about how the planet has become increasingly cloudy because of all these contrails. Clouds trap in the heat. So you get some regional warming, and that's blamed on CO2, even though 95% of greenhouse gases are water vapour. They are lying to us all the time, playing down when we find out information. They don't want people to know the truth, they just want you to fulfil the agenda. They want Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030 as it's now being called. They want one world government. They're on board. Just like Bill Gates, who funds Ken Caldeira and David Keith, who are key geoengineer proponents. Bill Gates has paid them millions of dollars. And he's a shareholder in David Keith's carbon dioxide removal business. Going to be very, very lucrative for David Keith. So we know why they are pushing hard for the climate change fraud. A sham. Because it is fraud to say that CO2 is driving climate change. It's an utter nonsense. The amount of global warming we've had since 1880 to 2012 is 0.85 centigrade. It's hardly a runaway global warming, dire global meltdown scenario. We haven't even warmed 1 degree since the Little Ice Age. It's true. It's absolutely true. They misrepresent the facts. They always talk about pre-industrial times. We must keep the temperature below 2 degrees rising from pre-industrial times. But they don't tell you pre-industrial times was the Little Ice Age, when the Thames used to freeze over and we had bitter long winters. They don't tell you that, do they? But that's a fact. Pre-industrial times was the Little Ice Age. So of course we're going to have some natural variants, some warming, because we're no longer in the Little Ice Age. The Thames doesn't freeze over like it used to. We don't have frost fairs on the Thames. And the idea, they say, oh, these different regional differences, like the medieval warm period, they try to say that's just regional. Well, regional goes from Greenland round to China. It's not regional. It was global, but they need everyone to believe it was regional because that just doesn't fit in with the programme. The lies. Do we think that these spreading out chemtrails, because that's what they are, they're not normal contrails, because this is maybe a normal contrail, may not be a normal contrail, but look, it's a short dissipating one. In fact, all the planes I've managed to actually see so far, whilst I've been talking, have only been short dissipating ones. But we can see the evidence of these persistent trails. So where are they coming from? I mean, look at the state of these things. They don't look natural. Look at it, it looks like a chemistry experiment in the atmosphere. It's appalling that our governments should lie and deceive us. And they use compartmentalisation. People are on a need-to-know basis. So many of these people that we would like to challenge in the establishment, they don't even really understand the bigger picture. And they've got their careers to protect. And they toe the party line, as it were. It's absolutely appalling. What you can see in the sky is totally from an artificial source. None of this cloud formation is natural, doesn't even look natural. And this does affect climate. It's time to wake up, my friends. Our governments are disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. They are working for the likes of the Rothschilds, the Royals, the Rockefellers, all these this oligarchy, these obscenely rich people who could end poverty and austerity and suffering all around the world, and they're the ones that bring us a war. Our governments work for these crazy inbred people.